Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shantha Smith, the Equity and Excellence Coordinator at Gunston Middle School, also the lead educator. I am here this evening with a wonderful panel as we begin this community discussion around race. And as I open up for you today, I thought about what I would say in my opening. And I thought about, well, do I speak about as a teacher in Arlington County Public Schools who has experienced microaggressions, or perhaps as a parent in Arlington Public Schools who has been directly impacted and had to advocate for my own child of facing inequities in our district, um, in leaving meetings feeling unheard and unseen. And I decided that as a Black woman in America, and as a Black woman in Arlington Public Schools, I thought of one word, and that is silence. I'm not yet free to speak my truth. And so, as a Black woman, I wanted to say, well, what can I say to our audience today? And what I want to speak about is really why I'm hopeful. And as I think about the reasons why I'm hopeful tonight, I think about district initiatives that I've created, such as Grading for Equity. I think about America to Me. I think about other initiatives that I've created, and really, I'm hopeful because I see my colleagues from around the district coming to these trainings time after time, really ready and hungry to learn more about what they can do to help their students. I'm hopeful because as an educator at Gunston Middle School in Arlington, Virginia, led under the leadership of Dr. Lori Wiggins, I'm hopeful because I see the three-pronged approach that we've created to address systemic inequities in our school in a systematic way. We have a place where teachers are learning about culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy. We're treating teachers as they go on their personal journey and learning about what it means to, what is race in America. We talk about white supremacy. We have real conversations around race and implicit bias. I'm very hopeful because in this district, we have people who are ready and willing to be engaged in these conversations. And as we're energized with our new leadership in Arlington Public Schools, I'm excited because now is the time. And if not us, then who? This is a place where I look forward to the day where we are the premier district where others come to see how we address our systemic inequities. I am grateful for this opportunity, and I'm going to take a moment to just share with you some of the logistics for today. First, we want to make sure that, as you know, when we deal with conversations around race, we need to have some norms. So I'm going to just introduce our norms for today. One, stay engaged. Two, experience discomfort, which means that discomfort is inevitable, especially in a dialogue about race, and that participants tonight make a commitment to bring issues into the open. It is not talking about these issues that create divisiveness, the divisiveness that already exists in the society and in our schools. It is through this dialogue, even when uncomfortable, the healing and change begins. Next, speak your truth. This means being open and thoughtful about the feelings and not just saying what you think others want to hear. Expect and accept non-closure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in uncertainty and not rush to quick solutions, especially in relation to racial understanding, which requires ongoing dialogue. So we're gonna start with a 3-minute video about the conversations.
Finally tonight, a special contribution to our series, Race Today, where we've been exploring how different generations see the issues making headlines. The Conversation is a short film from the OpDocs team at the New York Times. Directors Gita Gann-Beer and Blair Foster spoke to parents of African-American boys about the conversation they have with their sons on how to respond when stopped by the police.
There's this unspoken code of racism and white supremacy that says that my life does not matter.
You can put your hands up and say and cooperate and say that I'm choking and still be killed, and then there's no repercussions.
It's maddening. I get so frustrated and angry about having to prepare my kids for something that they're not responsible for.
And these are conversations that people of other races do not have to have with their children.
The conversation with him was really just, look, you're a beautiful young boy.
Being an African American is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful blessing. You have come from great people, but it's also a hard thing.
In America, because of your skin color, as a Black boy and as a Black man, we are going to be dealing with a lot of danger.
Under no circumstance are you to talk to the police if you're arrested until I get there.
Do what they say. Don't get into any arguments.
Make sure your hands are out of your pockets so they can see.
These are the questions you can ask. This is who to call. This is what happens if this bad thing. It's not like, please, master, don't whip me. No, it's like, excuse me, sir, what is your badge number? I'm going to film this.
If you want police brutality to stop, if you want police to treat you like a human being, then you have to see yourself as a human being.
You have every right in this world that anyone else does.
What I love about you as my son is I remember when we thought about having you and, knowing that we wanted you and watching you grow.
You are the Muhammad Ali, you are the Malcolm X, you are the Martin Luther King.
You are an amazing young man, and the future is yours.
And I will do my best to make sure you're safe. That's it. I love you.
And you can see the entire film along with additional OpDocs videos at nytimes.com/OpDocs.
So now
Verizon knows how to build on.
we will start by addressing questions received in advance and invite you to share additional questions during the session by submitting them in Microsoft Teams Q&A or by texting to 703-957-0089. You may also watch this meeting with closed captions on our website or on Comcast Channel 70, Verizon Channel 41. So before we get started, I want to introduce to you all tonight Aaron Gregory, the new APS Chief of Diversity and Equity Inclusion Officer. Mr. Gregory has an extensive background in education spanning 20 years. He served at the state, regional, and local level in a myriad of leadership capacities. He is passionate about being an equity champion and building sustainable systems for the betterment of students. Mr. Gregory.
Good evening. So today I begin the conversation with the conversation. A conversation I remember that my father had with me at a very early age. The conversation that many of you who are watching this video today have had with your children, and the ones also that are fortunate enough to never have to have this conversation. But if you've never had to have the conversation, I ask that you close your eyes and you just hear the words of the parents. Hear the words, because many of you are parents. See their fear, see their anger, see also their love for their children. So the conversation I had, I remember many, many years ago as an elementary school student, and those conversations are always the same. They always lead out the same. It's always the same thing. So I can hear my dad's voice. And those conversations were the same conversation that my dad had with my grandfather had with my great grandfather, and down the line. And it's also the same conversation I've had with my son. So today we start with the conversation as we set the stage. And this is the first of many conversations that we will have as a community, as a structure, as a school system, because they're important conversations. So today we begin, but it won't be the finalized conversation. It won't be the finish. And we're going to start the conversation by opening it up with some questions as we embark upon the 2021 school year and also throughout the summer. We have two pandemics going on. We have COVID-19 and we also have racism 2020. And we have to address both accordingly because social emotional learning for our students is of the utmost importance. And we want to be able to start that conversation today with some understanding, with some empathy, with some hope. And finally, we just want to have an opportunity to be able to give our students the opportunity to hear our voices, to know that we care, to know that we're here, and to know that we're always with them. So I'll turn this back over to Dr. Smith, who is going to introduce the rest of our panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. So I'm going to allow you all just a few minutes to introduce yourself. So tonight, you guys, we have our new superintendent, Dr. Duran, our school board chair, Tanya Talento, teacher, Antoinette Waters at Wakefield High School, parent, Emily Vincent, and I'm just going to allow you all a minute or two to introduce yourself. Oh, I missed the person who is on camera with us, a student at Yorktown High School, Emily Ambalou. No. Galilee Ambalou, forgive me, my apologies. Yorktown High School, who's joining us via Microsoft Teams.
Thank you for that, Dr. Smith. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Dr. Francisco Duran, the new superintendent here in Arlington Public Schools, and it's a pleasure to be here to have this conversation in a community that's needs to have the conversation, but also is open to having the conversation. On my first day as superintendent, I sent out a message that many of you saw, and it was important to send out that message to not be silent about what we all needed to pay attention to. If we weren't paying attention to it, some people have been paying attention to that issue for many years. I've lived that many years, and others were just being brought into the conversation through the media. Very important, though, for us to understand and recognize that talking about the issues we're going to talk about tonight, as Mr. Gregory said, is something that is not an event. It has to be part of our work. And I think about my role over many years working in the equity space, and people think about what is equity, and oftentimes we want to say equity is this or it's that. I describe equity as being a verb because it's an action. It's the actions we take. It's not a noun. It's not one thing that we're working towards. It's the conversations that need to be had. For me as a leader, it's important to create the space to allow all of us to be heard and to make sure that we're listening to everyone's perspectives. And that's what tonight is about, and that's what we're beginning to do in this series. As Mr. Gregory said, we're dealing with two pandemics, and both of them are causing a lot of trauma, physical, emotional, mental trauma. And the only way that we will work through that is by supporting one another. And I think we've had quite a bit of conversations and more around COVID-19, and we're all listening to experts on what to do and how to stay safe and 6 feet social distance and wear masks. Have we had that conversation about racism and how do we deal with what we all need to do in whatever space you come into this conversation? Some of you come for the first time wanting to listen and learn. Some of you come to it with a lifetime of experiences. Wherever you are on that journey and on that trajectory, we are just simply glad you're here. We're glad you're on this journey joining us, and we continue to commit, and I commit, that we will focus, we will listen, and we will not just have the conversation, we will take actions that are needed to make sure that we're changing the trajectory of our students, our staff, and our families here in Arlington Public Schools. And as we listen to our students today, I'm so glad that she's here virtually. She is why we're all here. The work that we do each and every day is for our students' success. As you listen to those parents, what they talked about was wanting the best and the better for their children. For all of you who have children or you have family members, if you don't have children, you want the best for them. You want a better life for them than we had. And so there are a lot of wants that we can have. There's a lot of desires we can have. But what actions are we putting in place to actually do that? So I'm really excited to be here with an amazing panel, and I'm so glad that you're all here virtually listening and engaging in this conversation. We can and we will continue to make sure that all voices are heard. We will not be silent. We will not simply put words on statements that we send out to make ourselves feel like we are saying something without actually doing something about it. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tanya Talento, and I am chair of the school board. And I'm excited to be here this evening to have this really important conversation. This evening, you will see me wear two hats, my school board chair hat and my Tanya Talento Guatemalan American child of immigrant parents hat. So I have to find hats to wear because I have learned to make people comfortable around me. And that is how I have survived my journey here. So I'm going to start with my school board hat. And tonight, on behalf of my Vice Chair, Monique O'Grady, and members Reed Goldstein, Barbara Cannon, and Nancy Van Doren, who are joining us virtually and listening to the questions and the discussion tonight, we thank you for being part of this discussion. This has been work that our board has been doing for a very long time, but change when it comes to racism and equity is slow, and it's slower when people don't see it. And I'm hopeful with these tragedies and the pain that our nation has embarked on and seeing our truth as a country, that people will now see it and change will be faster. We wouldn't be here this evening without our superintendent and our Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, Dr. Duran and Mr. Gregory. So thank you both for leading us in this direction. These conversations as a community are overdue, but it's something, again, that our board has been working on. So a little bit about, I want to make sure that our community, those who are first tuning in or just paying attention to this, understand that we've been working on equity and discussions about implicit bias and subconscious bias for years since I've been on the board. The changes have been slow, sometimes they're quiet, but one of the things that came out when I was on the school board is this document called The Changing Faces of Arlington Public Schools Over the Past 6 Decades, and it's dedicated to our work on integration, courageous conversations that then became challenging conversations, what we did. It's important to just know that we started to talk about this. We also charged our prior superintendent to develop a diversity framework in our hopes to try to address inequities, to try to provide support and encouragement and discussions about our diversity here in APS and ensure that our students of color had a place, that we were closing the gap and what that looked like. And we felt like we had done so much, but we were still not making strides in closing that gap. So we started focusing on what subconscious bias looks like, implicit bias, what does it mean? We started asking questions about disaggregating our data. So you have these 5 reporting groups that the Virginia Department of Education is requiring you to report, but it doesn't define us. You know, we have Black immigrants, we have Latino immigrants, we have generational Blacks, we have generational Latinos, and their experiences are so different coming into this country and experiencing racism and experiencing what it means to be in a classroom and what that looks like and how you dress. I'm wearing my big hoops earrings tonight. I've never worn these publicly. They're my favorite earrings. I've never worn these publicly because I'm chair of the school board here in Arlington Public Schools without a college education and potentially in a high school dropout who got a degree alternatively. But this is what I would love to wear every day. But that has been my privilege to assimilate and make other people comfortable around me. But what if my skin were darker? What if I was as dark as my dad? Sometimes I want to be empowered to be darker so that people can see who I am. And that is experiences that you can't talk about in education and every day because you weren't allowed to before. And I'm hoping that changes starting tonight. And so tonight, our board has been on this journey, and some people have been paying attention to it, and for others, it's been a very quiet journey. We have done a lot of work. Our SRO MOU, that's another big thing that we worked so hard on. It used to be a 1-page document, now it's a 10-page document focused on students, but we're hearing more discussion. So there's a lot to discuss tonight. I'm here to support the community's questions, provide answers, share a little bit about my experience as a Latina in the US, share a little bit about my journey on race, if it requires that, to support the questions. But one thing that I learned in my journey on equity and advocating for equity is you cannot grow if you're not uncomfortable. And I just want to leave you with that. When you are comfortable, everything fits for you. You're comfortable. Why would you change that? Why would you change anything about you and your life and your lifestyle or whatever situation you're in if you're comfortable? That's why discomfort is a path to change. When you're uncomfortable, it forces you to deal with that discomfort. People who are Black students, or Latino students, or students of color, they've had to be uncomfortable every day of their life at some point. Going through that journey, wondering what they can wear today because of who they're going to speak to, wondering can they walk into that store with what they're wearing, what they look like. When a person says something to you, did they say that to you because of the color of your skin, because of your accent, or do they really mean it? Those are everyday questions for people of color in this country. So in order for you to understand that experience and to change that experience, you have to be uncomfortable and acknowledge what you lack, what you have, your privileges, your anger, your pain, and your hope for change. And I know that as a school board member and working with my colleagues, they have been looking to make those changes, and they've each been on a different journey regarding race and equity, but they've been on a journey. And to me, that's always been hopeful, because there are people in this country who don't even know that equity is a journey. And I'm really looking forward to starting this conversation with some people tonight. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Waters.
Good afternoon. My name is Antoinette Dempsey Waters. I have multiple hats. As our wonderful school board member, Mrs. Toledo has said, I am not only an educator here in Arlington, but I'm also a curriculum writer. And I want to thank Dr. Duran and Mr. Gregory for inviting me to be on this panel. It's really exciting because about 4 years ago, when the African American History Museum opened, I felt as though I wasn't the little girl on her island anymore. This person who had all of this information in her head, who has been on a journey to learning our story, our American history. I felt as though I was now with a group of people that truly knew. And when I walked into that museum, it was the most amazing place on earth to me. It actually still is, because it was the first time we actually had a full museum that truly told our American story. A lot of times people try to take African American history and pull it out as its own thing. And I like to tell people there can be no us without us. And you can say that as a pun on words, but it is. It's actually the truth. And so the idea of this otherness with race, and this otherness with African American history, to me, my hope is that starting the conversation also starts to close that gap. The idea that we are others, that different just because of how we look on the outside, really regulates what people think of us. So my hope is that this conversation really starts to peel back that onion and really start to take away the layers of what's on the outside and have us look internally. Let's have people just honestly looked at as just people. So in my course that I designed for Arlington, because the school board 3 years ago was way ahead of the curve. The Arlington School Board truly supported me when I decided to write an African American history curriculum and have it as an elective. And they allowed me the full freedom to design a course. The course itself does not lean on a traditional textbook. People always ask me, well, what do I use? How do I find out the information? How do you find the information? So there are a few textbooks that are written. One of the, we call it kind of like the Bible of African American history, is From Slavery to Freedom, written by the illustrious John Hope Franklin. You probably heard of his, well, some of you may not have heard of his father. I have, but you would know of his father because the Tulsa riots, the work that we have, all of the identifying factors of who was there, where they were, his father was the one who cataloged all of that. So this is why this is who John Hope Franklin is. His father was the one who helped us get what happened in Tulsa. And so his book is kind of like the Bible if people really want to start their journey on learning our story, not just his story. But I lean on the documents. When we start going to the documents don't lie. So you go to the first one. You start at the beginning. Let's look at the Virginia House of Burgesses. Why in the world, if we start to question, how was there a change, and why in the world was there a change from you taking the status of your father versus now we're going to switch it up to take the status of your mother? When did that happen? Why did that happen? Because there was a little lawsuit of an enslaved girl who sued for her freedom in Virginia and won because legally by English law, you are the status of your father. Well, they decided we can't have that go on anymore because, let's be honest, I wouldn't look the way I did if some things weren't going on that plantation. So they started to change the laws. And so if we go to the law, we see the root of it all. So I always say, let's look at the documents. Once we start to teach children how to look at them, how to read the documents don't lie. A lot of times textbooks are written by people who have a sustained interest, and we have to be very cautious of what outside interests are. And so this is why I lean on primary source documents, historical narratives within my classroom, because it actually has a glimpse of the truth. We can't lie. The documents are at Library of Congress. They're at the National Archives. I didn't make it up. They exist. So that's what I lean on. And when I look at the curriculum that I wrote for Arlington and the one that I'm a part of for the state of Virginia, the overhaul honestly starts prior to a child entering a kindergarten class. It starts at that educator, the educator and where they went to college, because we can't ask an educator to do something or to teach information that they've never been taught. And that's where we start the true overhaul. In order for us to honestly, and maybe I have this lofty dream, to eliminate racism, we have to teach it. We have to teach where it came from, the root of it, so that people understand that it was a social construct of a particular time to validate enslavement. So I just hope that we can start at the university level. I'm working with some universities now to change that and to change how we teach educators, but that's where the overhaul to me starts. And passing it on.
Thank you.
I'm very honored to be included in this conversation. My name is Emily Vincent, and I'm the founder of a group called Facing Race in Arlington. I'm also the president of the Arlington County Council of PTAs. I started intentionally unlearning white supremacy and racism in 2014 after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. My daughter was 2 years old, and I watched on Facebook as one of my white friends who was raising her young Black son shared her fears for her child and his safety. In that moment, I realized that her parenting experience was very different from mine, and I understood that I would never have the same fears for my own children. That felt wrong, so I started to educate myself about the persistence of systemic racism. Since then, I've consistently taken small steps to continue learning and internalizing an anti-racist mindset. I've started having more and more conversations with people about what I'm learning, hoping to bring them along. I joined the NAACP so I could make sure that my work was held accountable to people of color in our community. I founded Facing Race in Arlington after hosting a community meeting to talk about race in August 2017, shortly after Charlottesville. Since then, I've been writing weekly updates to the group, sharing resources, providing encouragement, and modeling anti-racist action. I have committed to making this lifelong work. Recent events and the current national discourse have a very urgent feel, and there is urgency to this work. Much of this urgency is from people of color asking white people to engage in anti-racist work, to listen to them and believe them, to break the habits of fear and complacency and silence, to instead seize the challenges and face them, to make a lifestyle choice rather than looking for a box to check. Expect to make mistakes in this work, expect to be uncomfortable, and expect to want to abandon the work because it's hard. Expect to make the choice to continue the work. Racism and anti-racism exist on a continuum, a line with arrows on both ends. Any individual person can move along that continuum in either direction multiple times a day. Rather than characterizing people as racist or anti-racist, it's more constructive to label words, behaviors, and systems. You don't have to wait to have perfect knowledge to take anti-racist steps. You just have to move along the continuum in the anti-racist direction. I hope you will join all of us in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And joining us live, Galilee Ambaloo will introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Galilee, and I'm I think Thursday, and I really wanted to join this call in Arlington and in our community and like during my time, I've questions, and I've decided not to act on the phrases that my peers have told me and have said to me. And I feel like with coronavirus, we have more time to realize that the Black Lives Matter movement has been going on for a long time, and we now have the time to change because we're inside of our houses and we're more aware of it. I think that everyone should teach their children about race from a young age. I learned racism when I was 5, and I had the talk then. And it's really disheartening to know that a lot of my friends are very unaware of racism at the age of 18, and they don't understand the effects that it has on Black people's lives and other people and other races and people of color. So I feel like if we have open conversations and normalize talking about race, then there will be a lot of great change from that.
Thank you so much. Now time for the questions, the moment we've all been waiting for. This question is for everyone. Why does APS need to talk about race and racism, specifically in education and with our students? We'll start with you, Mr. Gregory.
So it's very important for us to have these conversations. Without it, we need to move towards being proactive versus reactive. And today is a start for that. Many of us, or many have said that race and talking about race within schools is politicized. but there's nothing political about people dying or people losing their lives. There's nothing political about having to have that fear. So when we talk about race, we're either going to normalize injustice or marginalize students, but we need to have these conversations so that we can start focusing on some of the inequities that we see within our education system. And the only way we can do that is by having open dialogue, by making sure that our students know where they are along the continuum as we look at some of the concerns with race, and having conversations that our students have possibly in the classroom. Without being able to have those conversations and talk about it, we will never be able to cure the problem. So I think it's very important for us to start having those conversations with our students at a very early age.
Thank you so much. Ms. Vincent?
Children learn so many things from their peers and from their teachers. They don't have to learn anti-racism at home. It helps if they do, but school administrators and teachers have an opportunity to teach children how to navigate the world and how to truly understand the challenges that our society faces, and the underlying things that are taught, if we're not explicit, are being taught by white supremacy. So if we don't speak up and say that we need to be anti-racist and teach our students how to be that, then white supremacy will teach them for us. I'm wearing the educator hat, so I look at the curriculum as a whole. And if we go back and we go through the curriculum, we can look at it as the idea that white supremacy sometimes can be indoctrinated into children, no matter what color they are. If they're in the classroom, they may not see themselves in, and I use the history context because I am a historian, in the history textbook, or they see themselves as a marginalized people or having their history or their story diminished within that. And that curriculum was written by people who have an agenda to promote. And so we have to talk about it in our schools because that's where children are being indoctrinated for about 12 years of their life.
Thank you so much. Before I go to you, we're going to go to Galilee. Ms. Amberlou.
I feel like if kids aren't taught about racism from school, they won't be able to identify it in their future work environment. So they may act in a way that offends other people, and that could cost them their job in the future. And they should also be sensitive to, or like aware of the emotions of others, because that's just respect.
Thank you so much. Ms. Talenta.
I think that it's important that we talk about race and racism, and specifically in education and with our students, because they're talking about it and learning about it already without guidance, without knowledge, without facts. And it's hard for me to answer this question because I don't know a life without talking about race or skin color. In my family, my dad is brown. I had uncles who were brown. I'm lighter skinned. It was always a discussion for me in my life at home. And then I went to school, and depending on what people look like, there was something happening. I don't know how to answer this question because it's a foreign question to me. I've always had to talk about race. So I was surprised when I saw this as a panelist because I didn't even think that you had an option not to. Like, I know that, I just didn't think about that or experience that. So I don't know how to answer that really well, with the exception of to those people who have the ability to not talk about it. Your child is experiencing it because there's people who live it and talk about it every day because that's just the experience. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
Last but not least, Dr. Duran.
So I think it's really critical. The question says, why do we need to talk about it? And I think we do need to talk about it, but I would take the conversation further to say what's important is to teach students to understand the history behind it. And you heard Ms. Waters did a phenomenal introduction about thinking about all of the history that we've been told from one perspective, which has caused, in many cases, race and racism and the notion of being anti-racist that Ms. Vincent talked about. If we don't understand the history, if we don't understand why things have occurred, then we are not really helping students to be fully aware and making good choices around what I would say education is about. How do we help students problem solve, critical think, be good community members? So if we're not talking about the real issues and we're also talking on the surface, most of us think about starting in kindergarten, we teach how students to get in groups, we teach students how to respect one another, and then we have various forms of doing that all the way through all of the grade levels up through high school. But if we're not doing that, we're really talking around the surface then. And we're telling students we want them to be in teams and in partnerships with people they don't even know and understand. So if we're not talking about it, then we're really not being true to what we're trying to accomplish for students coming to us each and every day. And I want to say, and I said it in the beginning in my opening, and part of the reason why I'm so adamant about having these conversations, I think silence is actually devastating to our youth and to our community. I think silence is a way of really ignoring what's in front of us, and our students will then make up their own decisions and discussions and learning through the media, through other areas. We have social media, we're very active social media, right, for our youth. And what they're seeing there and understanding, how do we help them learn those media skills and media literacy to understand and to really be able to become good citizens in our county and also in our world. So to me, how do you not do that is the question. Why would you not? And why would you not just talk about it? Why would we not make sure we're educating our students, and not being silent is very important first step.
I love that. Why would you not? That is a good point and a great question. Our next question actually is for you, Dr. Duran, and our school board chair, Ms. Talento. The question is, Arlington Public Schools has what seems to be a uniquely successful relationship with the Arlington County Police Department. The school resource officers are generally exemplars of supportive, pro-child, non-disciplinary protectors in our school communities. How will APS and ACPD ensure that the priority remains student support and not a militarized police presence in our schools going forward? Will the role of the SRO change as a result of the recent events? I'll start with
I need to turn my mic off first. I'll start by simply saying that as we think about discipline and we think about how we are supporting students through that learning process, and I see that as a learning process, we have to and we will remain committed to our policies, which say school administrators and teachers are responsible for interacting with students in that way. I'm being new here. I will defer in a moment to Ms. Talento about all the work that's gone on in regards to the SRO MOU. But I can say in a broader level that I've been a supporter, and I will continue to make sure that we are moving our disciplinary process to restorative justice process, where we're helping students learn and understand consequences through not getting a consequence and saying you're suspended and you're now in detention or whatnot. What has occurred? Helping them to learn through that. And so I'm really happy to support and join what's happening at the state level, where all of our discipline code of conduct is going to be revised. And we are revising that based upon the guidance that we're receiving. And it's excellent guidance because it helps shift the narrative around how we engage with students when they are involved in a disciplinary interaction with us. And so that's just one part of it. But the part about having SROs in schools, I will let that to Ms. Talento. We will have conversations about that. But in my past experiences working in various divisions and districts, that has been an area of mine and particularly I think as a principal, I did have an SRO in my school. And how did I make sure that that person was not a part of working with students in a disciplinary way, but was separate? And I think that's the most important part, because as you said, there are some good SROs who have done some great, amazing things in schools, and I've experienced that. But now we need to have a conversation as we're having at this table around what does that look like overall. And so, Ms. Talento, I know that there's been some discussions and there was some great work that the board did on the MOU. So if you would share that with the community, that would be great.
Yes, and I'll start with the question, will the role of the SRO change as a result of recent events? I don't know the answer to that because it requires a community discussion. I know that we've been getting requests to remove our SROs from our schools, and I want to acknowledge that we are reading them, we are hearing them, we are listening to them. And this will go back, this taking back to the other part of the question. The reason that I can't answer that yet is because in 2017, we started a process to review our SRO MOU. And it was during a time where I think it was a 2015 or 2016 report on the state of Virginia had the highest school to prison pipeline, one of the highest in the country. We started looking at Arlington, and while Arlington was one of the lowest counties that had a direct correlation based on reports and the data being collected for this determination regarding the school to prison pipeline, we still had percentage, and our MOU was non-comprehensive at all. It was if my memory serves right, it was 1 page. My personal experiences have me in my community activism prior to being on the school board. I had worked with students who were involved with the law and in my opinion should not have been. So I was a strong advocate for this as well as my colleagues on the board. And we started looking at this. At the time, Virginia was looking to change it. So they developed a committee made up of educators, mental health experts, I believe, legal experts, a lot of people really looking to support the student and develop this model SRO MOU. And we got the CCPTA involved. We had advocates who were actually representing students in discipline matters, really making sure that this SRO MOU was student focused, really recognizing that students are in a school system to learn, and security office, school resource officers are there to protect the students in the school system, and they have an opportunity to be mentors. And that's really what the SRO MOU outlined and detailed, and it talked exactly to what you said, Dr. Duran, about administrators being the primary point of contacts for any situation happening with students and so forth. But it really required a mindset change and training. We're in that process. We developed the students' rights, because one of the biggest challenges, our students didn't know what their rights are by law. Unfortunately, they don't have the same rights as adults, and that's unfortunate. We really emphasized making sure that parents were called prior to any interviews with police. We did a lot of that work, but now we're being asked by our community to consider removing them, and that's just a much bigger discussion. This past February, the Virginia General Assembly passed a law that requires all school systems to review their SRO Memorandum of Understanding with the public and make sure that it doesn't, what needs to change, review it. And so we actually, prior to all of this, had that in our work plan for next year. And it is currently scheduled, I believe, in January. And the board will be meeting with our superintendent to determine, do we need to move up that timeline? What does that look like? What is the conversation? What does community engagement look like? So that's where we are now. And I think that addresses the questions, because I think that effort, and I think that there'd be people who would argue that we are uniquely successful with a relationship with ACPD. I think the people in our system would argue that, and I don't know if we're fully successful at having this relationship, but the goal and the efforts that have been put forth over the last 3 years are towards having a relationship with the police department where they are mentors to our students, not disciplinary. And our system has been working really hard. One of the things that we took on with this as well was where our because it's not just about SRU to stop this, it's about discipline referrals, suspensions, what does that look like? And so our system has really made efforts to sharing that data with each school by school, saying here are your discipline referrals, here are the demographics of the students being referred, what does that look like, what do you need to change, how are we using restorative practices? We are in that work, and we started that work over the course of 2017, 2018. But again, that work does not change overnight. It's a constant work and effort and an eye and advocacy and ensuring education, training on the implicit bias, understanding your data, understanding what institutional racism looks like in our system. So That's how I would answer that question.
Thank you so much. I know that we have the Reaching New Heights with Tara Ann McGee. So I know the positive role that they play, and the kids are always surprised to find out at the end of our rock climbing experience that they're working with SROs, and that helps to build that community, because these are people that it builds, that humanizes our children to the police. So thank you so much. I'm going to the next question, and this question is for Dr. Duran and Ms. Waters. How does APS ensure that the curriculum for all students is inclusive of diverse backgrounds and perspectives, as well as accurate in reflecting our American history and history of Arlington?
Well, I think first we have to acknowledge that it's currently not inclusive, and we need to begin to understand where it's not inclusive, and that's a very, very important but large task. And when we think about where we can begin, I think one area that is clear for us, that's most obvious, is our social studies and our history curriculum, where we need to begin to look, actually dig deep into that and to understand where are misrepresentations, where are the areas of no representation, or someone else telling a story that does not reflect the true, and as Ms. Waters said, the documents that are there. So I think that's the first start. We have to make sure that we go deep, and we've begun that work, and Ms. Waters will talk a little bit more about that work. But we have to acknowledge it. We have to begin the conversation, and then we have to reach out and establish not only new curriculum and new courses. That might be one thing, and we've done that at the high school level with the African American History course. Virtual Virginia, who we partner with, has a new African American History course that we're bringing in. So in some cases, it's bringing in a new course and making sure that we're teaching that. But it's more important for me to help look through all of the existing courses and help teachers, provide them the resources they need, the framework they need to really make sure they're being inclusive of all perspectives. And Ms. Waters, if you can share, there's a lot more that you are doing, and I'm really honored and more proud of you, having served on the governor's task force looking at that. And so it's a blessing to have, well, that's one thing I should say, we have people like Ms. Waters here who support her. And as she said, the school board did support her a few years ago. And when that's the only way we're going to make this change, is having that kind of support from our teachers. And that to me is also really critical that we must do, is make sure that any curriculum development involves our teachers as a driver in that, and they know and they can share with us different perspectives, and bring in our parents like Ms. Vincent, who can talk about that and include them in a partnership around how we're teaching all of our students. So Ms. Waters, if you can share some of the other real specific things that you've already done, and some ideas about how we could move forward.
So when we think of it as in Arlington at the local level, and at the state level, we've been looking at all of the different curriculums. In social studies, I do know exclusively, but they've also been going through the English curriculum as well. I know that the English department has been going through and looking at some of the books that the students read, the poems that they read. Have we taught the context in the history class? Do students know the context of the text in which they're reading? And then in the history courses, we're really going through it course by course. And at the state level, Dr. Lane has been fully supportive of just us going through with a microscope and just saying, here is what we need to take out, especially when we think of individual lessons for teachers, to have students, maybe do some of these, lessons that are a little bit taboo, and simulations may not be what we deem as best practices. So we are really at this moment right now actively working on what can we do to improve it. Let's look at the different lenses. Let's look at Native Americans. How is the story of Native Americans looked upon? What about when we had the Mexican-American War? We have a huge group of people where they didn't cross the border crossed them, and guess what? They're now Americans, and now it's like, okay, well, I have land on both sides. I'm Mexican and I'm American. And so we have this whole piece where we have to say, now we have new Americans. We have this America is expanded, and now we have new people who are a part of America. So it's really trying to make sure we include every voice in our curriculum, and also every voice when we look at that English, I would say, lens. What stories are we including? Are we making sure we include the stories of the Chinese railroad worker? Are we including the stories of the Mexican American who basically was, her parents fought in the Mexican American War? Are we including all of those different stories of us as American citizens? So that's what we're doing now.
Thank you.
Thank you. You wanted to add on?
I did. So some of the things that as I'm starting to transition in is to look at our data. And one of the telling things like we need to look at and talk about is our Your Voice Matters survey of our students and looking at our student data. And what I found is very interesting is that not just our students of color, but even our white students don't see themselves as a reflection of the curriculum. And that's telling to me that we need to look at culture instead of just looking at race. So are we embedding culture in a hip hop culture, whatever that culture might be, with our students within our curriculum? And if so, and if not, how can we start doing that and transition and just looking at culture in addition to race as a perspective of our curriculum?
All right. The next question is going to be for you, Mr. Gregory, as well as you, Dr. Zwan. How will APS respond to families who simply do not want to talk about topics of racism and social justice? Mr. Gregory?
So first say is that maybe adults may not want to have these discussions, but our students probably do. As I'm looking at the protests, and a lot of them are young people, so they're having these conversations, even if our adults are not prepared to have those conversations. Again, these conversations are not political in nature, but it's the role of the educator to not teach our students what to think, but to teach them how to think, for the metacognitive skills that they're going to need and as they advance into a global society. So I think what we need to do is we need to bring people along into the conversation of having these conversations. You can't force the conversations, but we can bring people along by opening up the conversation to adults that may be apprehensive to have a conversation. But I think silence is golden. So it's going to take those that are silent on a lot of these topics to have these open conversations with their friends. And that's how we bring people along slowly with having these open conversations.
Dr. Dwan.
And as a follow-up, I think it's important that we have conversations with those families to really understand what is their concern. Why is it that they don't want to talk about these topics, and really get them to understand? I think people often will come to the conversation afraid and worried that we are trying to teach their students that this is what you must think, and this is why, we're almost trying to say to them, okay, if it's about immigration, you need to think that this is a good perspective on immigration, rather than understanding the different perspectives. And so I think for sometimes many families, and I've had these conversations with families before, and they just want to make sure and understand. And I think partnering with our CCPTA, and we have our president here, but for principals, for teachers to really take the time to listen and not simply say to that family, oh, you don't want to talk about it, that's not a good thing. Understand and listen to why a parent is feeling that way, and help them to bring them along to get to where that they can see what we're trying to do is help our students understand all perspectives. And we think about words that get used in the media, and if we spend too much time getting caught into that, then we can get into that narrative of a us versus them when we're really trying to understand everyone's experiences. And I think about, many experiences that I have encountered when I was a principal and as a teacher. It's often just listening and taking the time and not making an assumption, because I think when we're talking about race and racism, and we're talking about equity, those of us who are very passionate about that can sometimes get caught up to think if someone doesn't want to talk about it, we are actually doing to them what we don't want done to us, which is we're making an assumption that they're coming at it and coming to the table from a negative place. And I have to assume, and being an optimist person, that they're not coming at a negative place. They're coming at it from a perspective of, I don't know what that means. I don't know what you're telling my child. I'm afraid of that. I want to understand that. And I think we need to simultaneously, when we're talking to students about racism and social justice, we need to have those conversations with our parents as well, which is what tonight is one. And I hope there are many parents watching, but the series of conversations we have to open up. And as adults, it's more challenging for us. It's more difficult because we spent years and years of understanding one way of thinking, and we have to help families feel comfortable to know that that's what we're trying to do for your student, is just help them understand different perspectives. And if we think about the global society that we're in now, and being online and being virtual in so many ways, we're having to work with people and interact with people that we're not actually next to physically. that's even more important for us to develop those skills. So again, to just reiterate, we have to listen and respond to families. We have to bring them into the conversation and help them to help us know, how can we help your child through this? And let's talk about why this is important. And let's understand why all students' perspectives need to be brought in. And so I just want to caution all of us who are at the table and who are in this work virtually out there to be respectful of all voices too is important in this work. We can't just assume that if someone does not want to have that conversation, it makes them a bad parent or someone who doesn't want the best for their child. We have to approach the table that everyone wants the best for their child, and let's help them understand, and let's have that conversation. And to me, actually, that kind of a conversation is an equity conversation, when you roll up your sleeves with the parent and you listen and you help them work through what it means to have these conversations with their students.
We're going to move to some questions from our live feed. This question is for Mr. Gregory, Ms. Talento, and Dr. Duran. What is the school division's plan to address the racial disparities in the gifted education program? Anyone can answer.
I'm happy to start with that because, again, it's something our board has been working on and having actually lively debates about over the course of my service on the board. When I was a community activist, we actually started on this work with our English learners in having I think it was a nonverbal gifted test, and that was brought to APS, and I don't remember the name of it because it's been a long time. I think it's the Nagalari. Yeah, the Nagalari. We didn't have that in APS for all students, so we worked to bring that forward. We've also talked about working with our counselors. There's been discussions about removing counselor recommendations, about removing teacher recommendations for the gifted program. That's been an ongoing discussion amongst the board and staff with our prior superintendent. Our prior assistant superintendent Department of Teaching and Learning was focused on a different method of gifted instruction at middle school to eliminate tracking. But we have parents who feel that we need to provide gifted classes in our middle school because their students are getting served. So we were having discussions about how do we have those classes? Can we have it where it's student choice? You don't have teacher recommendation. It's not a test score. You know, you don't need anyone to sign off on it. You don't have to talk to your counselor about it. If we remove all those barriers and it's truly a child's choice who feels that they are ready to be challenged in that curriculum to take. But it's a growth, you have to grow through that because there's parent concern that by eliminating those barriers, some parents don't see those as barriers. So I apologize, I want to acknowledge that. I've always seen them as barriers in my journey on this. Some parents feel that if you don't have those requirements, that we won't be able to provide the rigorous instruction in those classes. But I think what the failure to see that is this whole conversation. We have to remove those requirements to remove the barriers to allow equitable access to these classes and to acknowledge that every child can be challenged and what does that look like. So on working for our students of color making more diverse, that's what we have to do. And that is a system-wide change and, in my opinion, a cultural mindset, but it is work in progress and you have to start with the discussion. We've had them, so I think we're ready to start moving forward. And it's already been asked, a preliminary discussion with our superintendent about how we're going to be addressing gifted services. So I know that's something we'll continue to talk about.
Ms. Talento actually did a very good overview of that, but I would only add one other piece is that we really have to understand that providing access starts very early on, and we have to look at barriers even beginning in preschool and access to preschool or kindergarten and experiences, because what we see happen quite a bit, and certainly with gifted, but just in general about access to rigorous opportunities for students, is the foundation is not always equal at the beginning. And so when we set up, as Ms. Talento called barriers, but as we set up, and they're not always barriers, there's sometimes that we have actual criteria that students need to meet. Some cases we can create it into a barrier, but let's use the word criteria. When we're looking at criteria for students to be involved in some of these courses and some of these challenging opportunities that are more rigorous, we have to understand where as a system can we provide more supports from the beginning to help students be more prepared, and they don't have that experience. I think about my own experience as a student growing up. I didn't have access to a lot of classes that I may have wanted to be. I didn't have, and my mother didn't go to the school and advocate for me because if the school told her that I wasn't supposed to be, she said, okay, well, we have to respect the school and we're not going to push. And finally I had to, when I got to middle school, like, no, I need you to come and bring her there and help her too. And so how do we also create the space for our parents to understand how they can advocate for their students and know that it is. And there are many students who, without that, won't ever have the ability to move on because they won't have that advocacy. So part of our professional development and part of what the conversation with Talento was saying, how do we create all of our teachers to be advocates for students? How do we make sure we're creating that environment where all students have someone making sure that they're being set up for success? At the same time, for students who are gifted, that was the question, we need to make sure we are providing their supports that they need. I do think that when we think about equity, we often want to say equity is about kids who aren't performing well and how do we help them? Absolutely not. It's about every student having their needs met. And if you're a gifted student who needs to be challenged, how are we as a system making sure they're being challenged? But then how do we make sure that all students who need to be challenged are being challenged? Because some students are left out of that conversation. But absolutely, if you're a child who has not been left out and you're not having your needs met, then we need to do something different about that. So it's a larger, more nuanced conversation. It's not as simple, here's what we need to do, but it is one that there's so many elements to training, professional development, looking at our criteria, being more inclusive. When you really look at the definition of gifted is also being creative, being very inquisitive. And how do you capture that capacity of a child to be very creative and inquisitive? And that's not an easy identifiable one on a test score per se. So how are we looking for measures to see that, wow, you know, Aaron is really creative and we need to make sure he gets that challenge that he needs because of that creativity, rather than simply saying, oh, he did great on this test, so that's why he needs that access because of the score that he received on this one assessment. So it's looking at it very holistically as well. And Mr. Gregory, the question was for you too, so I'll turn to you.
I believe that we need to look at our students. We need to focus on the assets. So sometimes in education, we look at deficit thinking versus the asset and focus on the assets. Our students are either going to be at promise or at potential. So how do we move those students who are at potential into their promise? And how do we keep the ones that are at promise, continue to grow them as well? Some of the things we look at is making sure that, you know, our process is not subjective but objective. And that goes back to the process and make sure that we have the frameworks in place and the systems in place to ensure that all students have the opportunity that they need to be in those gifted courses.
Thank you. For this next question, it's again for all panelists, and we're going to start with our Yorktown student, Ms. Amber Lewin. So I'm going to start with you. The question is, in order to support the goals of APS mission statement and work towards a racially just America, how do we take a more proactive approach to teach all students about race and identity?
I think that teachers need to listen when people of color speak up, because I've spoken up about numerous microaggressions and racist actions that my peers and staff members have performed or like acted out in, and I feel like I've never been heard. And whenever I complain or ask for people to be held accountable, I'm always dismissed. So I feel like if you actually listen to the claims of students and what they've experienced, then you're going to have a more productive conversation and actually prevent future instances. And I feel like we should have more assemblies and just address race more often, because we have a lot of assemblies during the school year, but we never talk about how to classify racism and how that impacts others.
Thank you so much. Ms. Vincent?
Thank you. I definitely think parents have a role to play in modeling anti-racist work and encouraging these conversations at home. For younger children, talking about fairness and bullying, that ties a lot into what the schools are doing as well. Also, when we talk about racism and slavery, not to relegate that simply to the past, but to acknowledge the legacy that continues today and to really help students and children understand why that continues today so that they feel empowered to change it.
Ms. Waters? Would you like me to read the question again? Okay. In order to support the goals of the APS mission statement and work toward a racially just America, how do we take a more proactive approach to teaching all students about race and identity?
That's I honestly believe that educators have to start to look at themselves first. So before you can lead a discussion on race, before you can understand who America is as just a country, you have to know who you are. And I think that a lot of times people sometimes are hesitant to talk about race because they themselves have not reflected on who they are. So before they can support a child, they have to know who I am. Have I benefited from a racist society? Or have I been the benefactor? Or have my people been a marginalized group of people? And you have to be honest, not only with yourself, but with your children. I am very vulnerable in my classroom. When I teach, one of the funny moments a lot of my students say that they have in my classroom, and one that they say lasts with them, is my disdain for Thomas Jefferson. And I'm sorry for all the people who love him, but my personal disdain for Thomas Jefferson. And that's just who I am. But I'm very vulnerable and I'm very honest with my children about why I dislike this man. And I give them historical facts. Here are the facts of the case. And so I think that as an educator, before we can help Galilee, before they can even listen to Galilee, they have to know who they are. And then once they know who they are, they're able to open themselves up to their children, to be able to accept all children regardless, because they are our children. It doesn't, again, in my mind, race is this social construct that can be broken, and we can look at our children as just that. They're all our children.
Ms. Talento?
There's so much to say about this question, so I'll focus on my school board hat. And one of the things that I think we can do as a community and as a person who's in elected office is to really look at the policies and the structures we have in place. So if we want to be more proactive on teaching all students about race and identity, do we have safe spaces for that conversation? Do we have people who know how to facilitate that conversation? What do our policies say? Do we have criteria in place? Thank you, I was looking for a word like that. Criteria in place, things in place that while we look at it as a criteria or something to strengthen a program or strengthen, is it really a barrier in another way, right? So if we're going to be proactive about teaching all students about race and identity, we have to really talk about what race and identity is. Why is identity anything? That's a whole hour conversation if I talk to you about my personal journey on identity, because it has been so multifaceted, filled with race and skin color and language and culture. And it's changing even today, having conversations with the youth when they talk about race and ethnicity, which growing up for me was a very different thing. That's a whole separate hour conversation. So when we talk about race and identity, really being able to look at that in our structures, our policy making, programs that we bring forth, and how can we keep the integrity of the purpose of the program while ensuring that it's really open to everyone regardless of race or identity. And so I think that's another, in addition to what's already been said at the table, facet on being proactive, is really looking at everything you do and everything you put in place and everything you advocate for. Is it hurting someone? Is it leaving someone out? Is it creating a barrier, or is it really supportive of bringing everybody up and making sure they're living up to their full potential?
Thank you.
And for me, again, there's so many levels to that question, but as superintendent, what I will speak to is the need to make sure from the superintendent that we continue to message the importance of that we continue to talk about how we support conversations that need to be had about that we need to continue to provide the resources and the attention and the time to unpacking our curriculum, to helping teachers to have these conversations, but that we continue to bring in our parents and our students into the conversation. And in doing that, from a district level perspective, we have to look at data as we're making conversations and as we're making decisions, as we're moving forward. So we need to look at the quantitative data, certainly, but I think we've done a lot of that already, and we continue to see and tell ourselves there's gaps here, gaps there. So we can look at a lot of that, but that hasn't helped us too much thus far other than bring an awareness to us. So I think we need to look at the qualitative data, which is what we're doing tonight. And the qualitative data is bringing in people's voices, bringing in people's experiences, bringing in people's fears. The question about the family who didn't want to talk about this. Why? How can we help you with that? Let's understand that. Let's talk up to our teachers and hear from them and our principals. How can we help them to do this work? So from a superintendent's perspective, what I need to do is create those conversations, create those spaces, and continue to make sure this is a priority for us. And it's something that we will do and we will continue. There's a lot going on in our educational system. And as a leader, the one thing we can do is help folks to prioritize and provide them what they need to move forward in that work. So that's what I would do and commit to do to make sure that we're being proactive about it and that we're bringing in, and the we is important. The we is not those of us in central office here at SciFax. The we is not teachers only at their school. The we is the community. The we is the student, the parent, the community member who doesn't have a student in their system, but who has a commitment to making sure that because I believe that part of our role as educating students is helping them be good citizens. And so how do we bring in our community members as well, who sometimes feel that they're left out of the conversation? And that's why when we get into the quantitative data where we're looking at, student achievement scores and whatnot, and those are important to look at, that sometimes you lose then some of those other folks in the conversation because they feel like, well, that's your role to focus on SOLs and whatnot. But as a community member, I don't see my role in that. So we have to broaden the conversation and make sure we're bringing more voice and perspective in.
I love that. People's voices are definitely important. Mr. Gregory?
So I think those are very thorough responses. What I would say is kind of how we have been proactive. I know from the beginning of me being here, there have been many principals that have come to me and said, hey, can you help me with this problem of practice? Can we talk about this conversation? I don't know how to begin these conversations, and I've been coaching them along the way with having these conversations. So to me, that's being proactive. There are teachers that are saying, hey, I need additional resources. What is it can we provide to us? And we're providing those resources. So that's being proactive. Being proactive with the conversation, and the dialogue, but also being proactive with our actions. So some are asking about restorative practices and how can we be more proactive with making sure that our discipline numbers are not disproportionate. It's being proactive.
So as we move to the next question, this one is for Dr. Duran, Ms. Talento, and Mr. Gregory. APS has had incidents of racial and religious bias within schools. What should be done differently to address these incidents, and what needs to be in place? What should students or staff do if they experience racism from students? We'll start with you, Ms. Talento.
This is a difficult question because we've had this happen, and I, as a board member, don't know if it's been addressed appropriately. And that's hard to say and sad and upsetting. And the biggest challenge with it is the people who are addressing it, they're not bad people. They just don't understand. They just don't understand that. And I think that's where we need to start, is helping people to understand what it means to be a victim of a racial incident, what impact it has, how it traumatizes, scars you, and you're not going to show that. You're just going to because you've been taught if you're a victim of racism, it hurts today, you got to shake it off, and you get back up, and you put your head up, and you get back out there tomorrow, because otherwise you ain't living. That's what you're taught. But if no one understands that, then it looks like they're over it. And so to me, it's about education. What do we have a system in place that this happened? What's the mechanism? Let's talk about this, the slur, the remark. What does it mean? Where did it stem from? Educate what you just said. Let me educate you about what you said and why it is hurtful and why it's so offensive, right? Because then the other thing is, well, we need to punish this person. So you're punishing a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 13-year-old about something they have no education on that they said. And so now, yes, we might have addressed it one way, but you've hurt another child. Instead of taking that opportunity and saying, let me talk to you about what you said and why it's hurtful. And you know what I mean? And so to me, and then how do you teach a principal or a teacher to be that person, right? And so that's just work that I think we have to do. It's something that is happening nationwide more frequently, and we really just need to provide a program or a system in place that gives the administrator and empowers them to educate and support, and allows the victim of that to say, this was not okay. I am sorry this happened to you, and we're going to address this, and we're going to make sure that this doesn't happen to you again, and we're going to support you, and we understand this was painful, and do something there, versus we've addressed it, it's going to be fine. We're going to move you to another class, or we're going to, we need work, and that comes with education and training, and I think we're on a path to improving that, so.
Thank you. I think that speaks to what you were talking about, that personal work that everyone must do before they're engaged in trying to handle, because in the white fragility, they say it's not about the good or the bad. They can be good people and still be ill-equipped to handle situations like that.
I was going to add that I think our students, we have to hold our students accountable for what they say, accountable for what they do. And the way of doing that is also in education and making sure that they are aware of what hurts, what's offensive, what hate speech really is, that we define it accurately. But with that accountability, we also have to give our principals and our administrators the tools to be able to address these topics with their students. Give them some restorative practices to be able to say, we're not just going to, punish you, but we want to teach you. Because again, I go back to what I said, is that our job as educators is to teach our students not what to think, but how to think. So how to think through their problems and their emotions, how to think through and problem solve. And I think also is that when we have a system in place of positive behaviors, intervention and supports in place for our students, that accountability comes from our students. So it's a lot easier for our students to be able to hold each other accountable than it is even for the adults to hold students accountable.
Thank you.
I would only add I agree with everything that's said thus far. I would only add that the second part of the question is, what should you do if you experience it? So I think what my two colleagues just shared was, how do we create the conditions and the space and the tools for us to not have that occur, and when it does occur, how do we handle it appropriately? But I do think it's important to say that if it does happen, and if you do experience it, that does need to be reported. We need to let our teachers need to know, let principals and administrators know, students need to go to a teacher and let them know, and we need to follow through on making sure that we make that student or that staff member's experience whole, and we need to heal that process, and we need to follow up. We need to acknowledge that, and I think it's important because if we don't do that and we simply say we're creating a space and we're doing that, but you experience that and you report it to someone, or you're afraid to report it and you don't have any closure, that's just as hurtful and not helpful in any way to moving this work forward. So we need to make sure that people that are experiencing this have a space and a place to be able to report what's happened to them, and we need to provide, as Mr. Gregory was saying, the tools to help the investigation. And I would probably say, again, I've only been here 2 weeks, but in every place I've worked, so this is not saying about APS, but any place I've worked, people have reported these incidents, and they have not felt a follow-up. And so I imagine there may have been, and as Ms. Talento said, maybe it's not intentional, but regardless, to me, if it's intentional or not, it's still the same effect for the individual who reported it and didn't get any closure and didn't get any follow-through. So how do we as a system provide the clarity on how do you investigate, how do you follow up? I mean, maybe it's that basic to help people understand here's the expectations when someone brings this to you. But again, I do agree with what both Ms. Talento and Mr. Gregory said, that the consequence has to be looked at in a different way so that it's more restorative. But again, if you're the person who's experiencing that, it doesn't really matter at that end. It matters that you've not been heard and that you've not been listened to and no one has followed up. And I found that a lot of times we don't know how to follow up because we're not sure what to say. And so that's the part of the work that we need to do. But I want to emphatically say, if you experience it, you need to report it and we need to follow up.
Thank you. And for our next question, and this one will be for our student Galilee, this will be for you, as well as you, Dr. Duran, and then also our school board chair, Ms. Talento. This one is: recently at Yorktown High School, a student created a Black Lives Matter banner that was hung up. We have received emails from community members that don't understand why APS would support students in hanging this. Why should students be allowed to express their freedom of speech in such a manner? And we're going to start with you, Galilee.
I was one of the 3 students who helped put up the banner. My friends Kara Kabarovics and Virginia Quiderivic were the other helpers. And I think it's really important to show Yorktown support of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Yorktown community as a whole. I think that especially with the current events in the news, it would be really insensitive not to care or not to help people of color feel heard. I wanted to leave Yorktown with a Black Lives Matter banner because when I was a freshman, the school took down a banner during Black History Month. And I feel like we've come so far as a school to recognize race in some way. Obviously, we have a lot of ways to go, but I really wanted Yorktown to have conversations about race. And I feel like this would be a really good starting point. And I think kids need to understand that their peers actually care about this issue, because yes, it's good that admin and staff are actively trying to change. I'm more likely to listen to a friend or a person I know who's my own age than listening to an adult about a serious issue like this.
Ms. Talento.
Thank you. Thea, it's always wonderful to hear from our students, and thank you for the work that you're doing to advocate. This is a difficult question for me because I have personal feelings about why we should support it, but I'm trying to put my school board hat on. So I'm going to try to be a school board member and not a person. Not a person that has a position or feelings about this. One of the things that we have heard from our students since before I got on the board, which started with our high school boundaries, is we have issues with race. We're not addressing them in APS. I got on the board and the board prior to me was working on it. We've had a history of doing our best, working to address this. And what's interesting is, prior to this banner, we did have another banner that was created by a computer that put all of our students in students of color in the colored areas of that banner. It is important that during this time of unrest and social awakening and awareness of race and racism and the pain of that our students have the ability to have a voice, and that they know that the schools support them. And I know that this is hard for people who have not experienced it, but if you have been Black in America, you have been invisible for a very long time in so many facets of life. And we have an opportunity to say, I'm not invisible anymore. Please see me. I am begging you to see me. I am begging you to see me. We see you. We see you. And in Yorktown, a school that has struggled so much with this from the inception of it, when we were busing in Arlington, our communities, our Black communities were bused to Yorktown from the South. Yorktown has been a school that has struggled with this. To be able to support our students in this, to be able to say, I want to be seen, I just don't know how to not support it. And we look at our mission, vision, and core values, supporting our students is all over that. So that's my answer to that question.
Well, as much as I would love to keep going, we have questions for days, you all, but can you believe that it is already 8:30? So in the interest of time and to honor our everyone who's tuned in virtually, I just want to close by saying thank you all for opening this conversation of many in our district. I am definitely, as an educator and parent, excited. I think that the time that we are in is a new time, and I feel like this is going to be our moment. I know that we are going to be on the right side of history in Arlington Public Schools, and so thank you all for joining us. This has been a wonderful opportunity to begin these conversations about race, and I just want to say thank you for joining us live. We appreciate your time, and this is just the beginning, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to just simply say that, again, this is not an event tonight. You didn't join us for a virtual opportunity to hear us. You are joining us for a journey. You are joining us, many of you have been on the journey already, so you're continuing with us on the journey. For those of you that have been in this work, for those of you that are coming for the first time, we welcome you to be here with us, not with us tonight, but with us moving forward. We have to continue to listen. We have to continue to come together. And this is just one venue and one way. And as everyone has heard me saying in my town halls that I've been having, it's uncomfortable to have a virtual conversation. I'm still learning about how to do that. But I appreciate you being here because I think there's a human aspect about being together, coming together. And I'm learning that you can come together virtually and through Zoom meetings and whatnot, but Teams meetings and all these other things. But there's a power in the collective of coming together physically. And I look forward to when we can continue to do that in person. But I want to ask all of you to stay engaged, to remember what the norm was at the beginning, to accept and expect non-closure, and to experience the discomfort. And let us know how we can support you. No matter where you are on this, there's some people who are listening thinking, I don't support what they're saying, I don't understand this. Stay in with us. Let us know that we need to continue to have a conversation about a community, not one person's perspective, all of us. If we're going to be successful, if we're going to really help students succeed and thrive, we need all perspectives at the table. So if you're walking away tonight feeling like, wow, I didn't really agree with anyone's answer, I'm never coming back to this. Please don't. Please come back. Please bring your voice in and let us continue to understand one another, to learn one another, and to grow one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. And if you would just entertain me for 1 minute, because I do want to make sure that the community knows on behalf of our board, we just want to support what Dr. Wren said. This is the first of many conversations. There'll be many opportunities for people to share their concerns, ideas, and thoughts on equity and equality in APS and on our conversations on race and racism. And I agree, I've done this throughout my service, and I know my colleagues have too. Our board members listen. We hear what you have to say. Even if we don't agree, our job is to hear you because we represent you, all of our constituents. And this is a journey. So just know that we are here to listen. We're available. You can reach us via email. You can set up appointments with us. Whatever concerns or feedback or questions you have, you can come to us to ask those questions. We can share them with our superintendent and provide you an opportunity to have a greater conversation. So I just wanted to support that. Thank you.
Wow, what a great conversation. So thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. Would be remiss if I didn't say happy birthday, Mom. So would like to say happy birthday to her. As we end this conversation, I want to close with some artwork by our student, Kaitis Sabil, as we close out the conversation. Thank you. So as that's ramping up, what is next? So what's next for us is that we're going to continue the conversation with our students. We have a series for the summer that's going to start with them and for them to be able to hear their voices. So this is just the beginning, and we look forward to additional conversations.
Hello, my name is Kidda Sabil. I won the congressional competition for Wakefield this year. I'm in the 12th grade. And my picture was a pretty simple picture, in my opinion, that conveyed a pretty big message. It was that Black men might not be seen as equal compared to other people in today's society, and they can be traced back to systematic racism within our society. And so my brother in the picture was covered by a tree. That just represents the vision of Black men these days, how they might not be seen as equal, and they might be subject towards prejudice toward other people as well. And it's relevant to today's society because of the Black Lives Matter movement, all that's going on right now. And I feel like it was an important piece to highlight throughout my portfolio. And, you know, I honestly think that is really prevalent to what's going on right now. And so I feel like my picture captured a lot of the things that are going on today in history with all the stuff going on right now. And so, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the Congressional Committee taking the time to pick my photo. I'd like to shout out Ms. Davison, and thank you guys for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kaitis. We'll turn this back over to our moderator to close us out for the evening. Thank you.
This has been an amazing conversation. I am encouraged this evening from all of the answers. One of the things that you said that really stuck with me is I'm a researcher as well. So quantitative data is important, but you cannot dismiss someone's story. And so that is super important that we honor the stories and the voices of every Arlington resident, such as myself. And so as we continue this journey together, I am encouraged. And as I told you at the beginning, I am hopeful that this will be the time. And we owe it to our kids. We owe it to our students. We owe it to our community to be better for our future. This is history in the making. Right now, we are making history. We will be telling the story. And I want to make sure that when people are looking back and telling the story about Arlington Public Schools, it was because we were the pioneers in the work. And people from all around come see how wonderful it is here and how we were able to make sure all of our students were successful and color was not a factor, because everyone can be successful in Arlington Public Schools. So thank you all this evening for sharing your wonderful words of encouragement, of hope, and just being real. It's time for us to have these real conversations. Too long we haven't been able to have real conversations. So thank you so much for joining us at home. Thank you to our community members, our neighbors, my neighbors that tuned in and that are watching, and have a great night.